Welcome to this podcast on digital responsibility. There's a vibrant community across the world at the moment driving forward corporate digital responsibility, which includes a range of aspects from digital ethics, digital for the environment, sustainability, digital well-being, inclusion, accessibility, and more. My name is Rob Price, one of the founders of Corporate Digital Responsibility back in 2017. If you'd like to know more, have a look at the website corporatedigitalresponsibility.net. Welcome to episode 9 of season 2 of the Digital Responsibility podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Trish Shaw and Simone. I was going to say Bab, but of course you're Larson now, aren't you, Simone?
Certainly, indeed. I'm definitely Larson at the moment, and hopefully for a very long time.
Cool. So in fact, actually, Simone, why don't you keep on, and would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on what part of the world you're calling from or listening from. I'm Simone Larson, and I head up AI commercial product at Digital Catapult. Digital Catapult is a technology research organization that focuses on breaking down barriers and increasing adoption of advanced digital technologies in the UK. My background is in technology consulting. I spent a long time in some of the top tier consulting firms. And in about 2016, when I was at Accenture, I did a AI project, which I led and I've loved. And I've been on an AI journey ever since. From a Catapult perspective, we focus on 5 tech areas. So it's 5G, IoT, AI, immersive, and distributed systems. I am the AI commercial product lead, and really what that means is we engage with industry to ensure that the barriers to adoption are addressed and to help them innovate with our technology set. So we focus on machine learning. So that includes prediction, machine vision, reinforcement learning, and privacy preservation. And we also have a well-known, hopefully renowned AI ethics program. And I think that's it for me.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. And Trish, how about yourself? Would you like to give us a bit of an introduction? Of course, hopefully some listeners will be familiar with you from the excellent article that you wrote and we published a month or two ago on the EU AI regs. That, of course, is the focus of the conversation tonight.
Indeed. Well, again, I will welcome people from wherever you are in the globe right now listening to this podcast. I am Trish Shaw, CEO of Beyond Reach Consulting. I'm an AI and data ethics consultant because data cannot be divorced from the technology, just to be clear. And I provide a strategy, policy and governance advice. So I come from a background in law, so I have 20 years technology experience, both in-house and out-house in private practice, dealing with anything from commercial contracts, compliance, risk management, emerging data and tech initiatives, and regulatory and government affairs. I'm involved with the creation of international standards, ethical certification with the IEEE, and AI audit with For Humanity. They've recently represented at the All-Party Parliamentary Group on AI in the area of algorithmic impact assessments and AI audit. I'm currently working with businesses as they unpack the EU proposals and understand that responsible AI governance and what that looks like in their context, particularly where decisions are made about people with the potential of inclusionary and exclusionary effects. I'm passionate about education and awareness raising, so much so that I've been involved with the Institute for Ethics in AI in Education. And I'm also really passionate about the fact that innovation can be a real enabler with AI ethics at the helm through SMEs who actively engage meaningfully with their stakeholders.
And I think it's one of the interesting things for me. I mean, so just to be clear, responsible AI and the impact, unintended consequences of some of things that could be implemented, as you were saying earlier, has always been a key part of corporate digital responsibility. So absolutely critical from our listeners' point of view. And I think one of the battles has always been when regulation is put in place, do people see it as restrictive and controlling versus enabling and empowering positive things to happen? If I look at GDPR, for example, many organizations focused on obsessing around absolutely doing everything to prevent any sort of data loss, rightly so, but actually almost to kind of the complete exclusion of what can you positively do with some of that data if used in appropriate manners. So I'm interested in the conversations that both of you are having with businesses or indeed with those involved in setting policy and regulation as to how people are reacting to the EU regulations as currently kind of defined. And Trish, I don't think we need to go through the summary of, because that's already written and people can read that on the blog. But how are people reacting to that?
Fundamentally, it's been about trying to sell in the kind of European approach of trust and building trust in AI. I think that has been part and parcel of kind of understanding the spirit of the law. In terms of how have businesses been reacting, it's been a bit twofold, really. Some have said, oh, great, been expecting this. Now we've got something to work with, getting their teeth into, let's work with the timeline. Others are saying, not quite, you must be joking, but that how unworkable the regulation looks in terms of some of the definitions, the definition of AI itself, some of the crossover between provider and user. If you're making your own AI when you're not actually releasing it on the market and you're intending to use it in your internal employment and deployment, what does that look like? So there's been a little bit of kind of, this is woolly around the edges feel. So therefore businesses are looking to potentially influence what the next draft might look like. On the other hand as well, some are saying this is creating an entire compliance cottage industry. And that cottage industry will be one where there's a tick box approach to compliance, because there'll be certain things that you'll need to de-risk when you're buying it in, de-risk when you're using it across the AI lifecycle. And then when you need to go and deploy it yourself, if you're the provider, you're the one with the front market face, how much load of risk are you going to have to bear? What's your liability frontage? What's your liability protection? And how do you apportion that risk in the back office supply chain, so to speak? So those are some of the questions I've been having. Another quite interesting nuance one is whether or not businesses could consolidate their liability, ring fence their liability, consolidate that compliance effort by putting a joint venture special purpose vehicles together. So unlike in GDPR, where there's the kind of mention of an undertaking and liability sitting with the entire undertaking, so i.e. that will go to your group companies, your daughter companies, your Tochter Gesellschaften, sorry, the German came out there, and your subsids, whether or not actually putting together a special purpose vehicle with, you know, all holds barred, saying, right, there you go, off you go with that product to market, and have a unique product for the European audience. So that's another thing that's been coming out, is the idea that there'll be this two-tiered approach, or multiplicity approach, but two-tiered definitely. One set of AI being for an EU audience, and one set of AI for an out of EU audience. And fundamentally what that will mean is that the EU market will be served after the remainder of the world. So that's some of the conversations we've been seeing, having, really kind of interesting.
Which I've always been intrigued by the logic of, in a sense, if there are unintended consequences of something like AI, then putting a geographical boundary on that seems kind of rather nonsensical, because kind of the impact can still kind of happen wherever it might be. And also, I mean, whilst we're talking about the EU AI regs, well, what actually does happen in the rest of the world as other things kind of maybe come out. Simone, what's from your perspective? I mean, obviously the catapults are there to support SMEs and really bring them to an international market. So what are you seeing in the conversations that you're having with people through the catapult?
Thanks, Rob. So from an innovator perspective, so these are startups and scale-ups with an AI product, very much to Trisha's point, they're trying to figure out how do they serve the non-EU market first, and then focus on the EU market. I find that also when talking to industry, so adopters of AI, we had a year-long series of industry working groups last year around responsible AI adoption. And the key topic there for them was supply chain of assurance. So whether they are producing AI or producing products with algorithms, or they're procuring products, how do they map that chain of assurance, not only from an EU perspective, but from an international perspective. And it was all about how do they ensure that the risks that they're undertaking, either from a procurement perspective, but also from a shipping to outside of the UK perspective, that they are well aware of what it is and what tools and frameworks can be used to help them vet and mitigate that risk. So I guess it's on which side of the fence you're focusing on, right? So if it's a startup or an innovator, it's how do they grow and scale, and perhaps looking at markets outside of the EU in the first instance. But if you're a well-established corporate who's not AI first, so we're not talking about the likes of Google's and Amazon's, but perhaps ARM, who was a part of our working group, or Thales or Rolls-Royce, how do you ensure that the risk that you're undertaking in terms of creating products can be traced back, but also buying, like the procurement of AI products as well?
And in the conversations and the things that you've heard, I mean, if I suppose that I'm looking at the Brexit impact here as well. So this is the EU's position, and the UK will have a position, and indeed the UK is kind of then having series of trade negotiations with other parts of the world. Is this forming part of those conversations? Are people thinking about non-EU AI regulations and how that plays into some of the exporting of products from the startups, scale-ups that you're working with?
Yes, they are considering that. I think one thing they're also looking at, which you rightly touched on, right? So last year was, I think, finally coming to a close of the EU exit. And while they were looking to the EU to see where do they, how do they play and how do they cooperate, but also follow the regulation, it was also around what is UK's response to that to that strategy, and are we going to have our own point of view on that EU regulation? They were particularly looking for export regs to the US to determine how best to move forward.
And do you think that there's an appetite for increased uniformity between the regulations, or do you think that actually there will be a desire to keep things different, or even kind of more open, less regulatory, and try and drive more of an open market? And how do you get then the balance between trying to protect about the unintended consequences of the technology itself? Trish, have you got a view on that? I mean, I guess kind of the last thing that anybody wants is to spend the next several years trying to kind of work out a global set of standards that everyone agrees to. So how do we get the right balance?
Oh, it's a tricky one. I think there's two tiers to this. There's the kind of public sector tier and the private sector tier. So fundamentally, I think the UK is trying to find its place in a post-Brexit world, post-pandemic world, or a continuing pandemic. This is the thing we have to live with. And so given the regulatory freedom, so to speak, that they now have, there is much that the UK could do. I think it's a bit between a rock and a hard place. It's wanting to drive economic growth on the one hand, without appearing to impose too much that's too burdensome for the market, whilst also wanting to be this safe haven, a global leader in responsible AI, wanting to help find that supply chain assurance for people, want to help to find standards that people can adhere to from an ethical stance, and that be assured when you're using the AI as a consumer or as a citizen that there's a standard that's being adhered to when it's deployed here in the UK. The challenges I'm seeing is I don't see how that's going to be achieved without regulatory impetus. And at the moment, no regulation appears to be on the parliamentary timetable. Aside from what we're seeing on the online safety, which may well regulate to a degree recommender systems or certain content management systems in social media, but that's a small portion of what AI can and does do. There is appetite for regulation. If anything, from last week's all-party parliamentary group on AI is to go by, we're seeing certainly amongst the MPs an increasing, shall we say, crowd of witnesses that are looking to try and regulate or try and put something of more stature in place that will help prevent against the unintended consequences, and indeed the intended ones that we've talked about.
And I think, I mean, we touched there in terms of consumer expectation, consumer demand. So how will we know? How will any citizen know or understand which products or services that they're using have some degree of use of AI in all its various forms? And how will they know it's safe or certified or compliant with which regulations? Because surely that's getting into a level of detail that most people won't necessarily worry about. Equally, I know from previous conversations that we've had on this podcast that there are organisations talking about safety or privacy badges of certification, if you like, so that there's a raised awareness. What do you see as the consumer need?
I think there's a citizen need and a consumer need, and certainly from open government partnership perspective, they are very much looking at algorithmic transparency. How do you convey and communicate to the end user citizen what's happening in the AI system, what's happening with their data? And so there's some really interesting thought leadership in that space, and some really interesting tools that we're seeing in the likes of Helsinki and Amsterdam with the AI registers approach. Certainly that was definitely commented on the recent Britain Thinks report that came out, I think last week actually, which was with Cabinet Office and CDI. So from a transparency perspective, trying to engage the citizen, raise the awareness of the citizen, help them to care about the potential for harm or the potential risks that are bestowed upon them, this is a really good starter for 10. So that's from the kind of citizen perspective. From the consumer perspective, we've seen in the EU AI regs in the draft, this idea of a CE marking. And at the moment, there's no kind of impetus to convey that information of that CE mark to the end consumer. The only thing we've got is the EU AI database, but that will require the citizen consumer to go and have a look for themselves. So really interesting to know that probably since the EU AI regs drafts come out, this driver for an AI ethics label, something that helps to kind of highlight at least core risks to the consumer, is certainly increasing in traction.
Excellent. And Simone, how about you in terms of what you're seeing through the startups maybe that you're dealing with? Is anyone kind of very much thinking and innovating at this from a consumer or citizen-centric view, helping them to kind of understand or gain trust and confidence in the services that are being provided?
Surprisingly not. I haven't seen any of the startups or scale-ups that we interact with really focusing on this area. What they are focusing on, so as part of our machine intelligence garage, we have an ethics service that we provide, and it's a framework that we help founders or their CTOs or their heads of engineering or their data scientists use to ask the right questions as they're building the algorithm. And making sure that the data that they use is safe and ethical and you know, all the tick boxes, as you can imagine. And they oftentimes do that as a route to raise funding, right? So when we have our investor days to, you know, promptly show that they've gone through this ethical process and I guess their product isn't necessarily certified, but consideration has been made about how the algorithm was built, how the black box was built. But no, I haven't come across any startups in particular that have taken it a step further to figure out what that would mean for the end user, the consumer, or the citizen for their products. Interesting point.
Sounds like an opportunity for somebody listening.
Yes, well, indeed.
And that's the really interesting thing, because AI ethics and building trust with your customer base has got to be a competitive advantage. It's a real enabler for people.
Absolutely.
But do you think as consumers, unless you are in the AI sphere or have a particular interest, they care, right, enough to want to find products that are ethically certified, right? I guess, is there a demand for it yet?
I think the most important word there is yet. So I think from what I've seen, if I look at the rest of the digital responsibility kind of areas, then when I first started talking about this, five years ago or so, I used to get a lot of blank faces for most of the things that I talked about. But as time has moved on and maybe accelerated through the pandemic, as well as people have been a little more focused around how do we create more positive outcomes for planet, for example, then I think there is kind of stronger awareness. I mean, I had an earlier podcast, we were talking to some guys behind the Sustainable Web Manifesto, and I said, had anyone come to you and said, can you deliver me a website that's kind of most efficient in terms of its energy use? And they said kind of, well, no, but not until this year. And then somebody did. So I think for me, I think as people become more familiar of the potential of harm, then that will become something that people think about more. In the same way as we've had data leaks and kind of people are aware about their passwords because kind of they get regular emails say or notifications on their phone to say somebody's kind of got access to your password and please can you change it. It's therefore more front of mind. As things happen of a negative consequence, I think there will be more intent and people will look more to change the behaviours. So I agree, not today, but I do think it's changing. Trish, how about yourself?
I think it isn't so much that people don't care or that there's a great deal of apathy. There may well be that. I think people are just agnostic to the technology. How often do we think about the risks that computers present to us or smartphones present to us? They're a tool. And I think if we see AI as a tool and start to approach people and think and talk to people in the concept of outcomes-based approach, I think once we can give people the opportunity to see, well, in scenario A, scenario B, scenario C, and scenario D, these things could happen. And these present a real percentage risk to you. Until we talk about that, they won't be able to visualize or realize what that kind of harm or potential consequence to them might mean in practice. And I think, again, to Rob's point, it's about the harm yet. I think we're just going to have to wait to, unfortunately, there be a bad case, something really bad happening. Ofqual may have been a bit of a shot across the bows here in the UK in terms of an algorithmic system. It wasn't AI, but a data modeling approach to exam certification and grading that caused ructions within camps. And we know how swiftly that then got resolved. But we haven't got any case law or anything that came off the back of that because people were put in a position whereby that they should have been in had the system worked correctly. So there was no cause for them to move forward with it.
I think in a sense, I suspect there aren't going to be that many people that will go through any regulation or policy in great detail to understand the consequence on them from a personal point of view. But therefore the thing that then matters is what are the headlines? What stands out in terms of kind of making a tangible beneficial difference for people. So if we go back to the EU AI regulations, I guess my question is then, what do you think that's in there? If it's one thing that stands out most positively for you in the consequence it has for businesses or indeed for the end consumer or citizen that as we've just been talking about. Trish, do you want to start with that?
Oh, I want to do two.
Well, okay, go do two.
It's trying to drive good data and good governance. I think really that if we get to the essence of it, that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to bring about a commonsensical approach to how you govern, how you put structures in place to essentially de-risk your data, look at how biased it is or what mitigations you can put in place, where's the risk, key risk factors here, then what all the kind of other steps that you go through to get the certification conformity assessment and ultimately get to market. So it's just trying to put in place good governance with the good data and recognizing that data cannot be divorced from this. And I think that's what we'll see next. This is the draft EU AI regulation for now. We still have to learn a lot more about what the Draft Data Act looks like, what the Draft Data Spaces and Data Governance Act, I think we've got Data Spaces out, but Data Governance Act and the likes will look like going forward, and how these all work in synergy with one another. I think just one of the things that was a bit of a, not letdown, but more that there needs to be synergy with it is with GDPR. And I like the recognition that not all AI uses personal data. I think that needs to be a little bit clearer message, and we need to understand what role synthesized, synthetic, anonymized, pseudonymized, and fully personally identifiable information, what role each of those have and how they can impact risk for an AI system in terms of its outcomes. That's not clear at the moment. I think we need a little bit more discussion about that, whether it's a GDPR plus or whether or not it's making it clear in this draft EU AI regs, particularly as we know machine learning is very data hungry, and trying to apply non-personal data or kind of anonymized data in a machine learning sphere is quite tricky and doesn't produce the results that really people want to see.
Cool. And Simone, how about yourself? What stands out for you?
I would echo the point on governance. So the industries that we work with as part of the working group, for the companies that have operationalized AI, it's how do, for them, it's how do they keep their name out of the front page of the Guardian, right? So it's pretty much, okay, so this tool was built and it was implemented and it's being fed more and more data, right? Who keeps record of the new data elements that are being inputted to the algorithm? And if the outputs are changing and the outcomes are changing, just making sure that what it was originally developed for, the spirit of what the algorithm is still being used for is there. But I think another overarching problem that has been raised is around what are other companies doing, right? So we found that for the pockets of companies that have operationalized AI in the UK, they are looking to other peers to figure out what best practices, what tools are they using, what regulation are they holding as gospel until the UK comes out with their take on it. So it's all around governance and making sure that the algorithm that was developed 2-3 years ago and has been operationalized, the spirit of what it was developed for is still in place, and the data that it's being fed is still ethical.
It's been a fascinating conversation. I'm just very conscious in talking with you both. The amount of insight and knowledge that you both bring to the conversation is phenomenal, given the networks that you both operate in. So I guess my final question for each of you then is given that insight and given those networks that you are in contact with every day, what's the most exciting thing that you see happening at the moment in this field? So in terms of responsible AI, and it could be anything, but just to kind of finish off, what one thing would you kind of point our listeners to definitely something worth investigating when they get a moment? Trish, do you want to kick us off? Well,
I'm going to sound super geeky. And I am actually really excited about the prospect of regulation. I know that's really sad. It's gaining momentum, and I think it's the regulatory impetus for me is absolutely it's fundamentally required to give rise to a culture of AI governance. We've had many years where people have had the opportunity, businesses have had the opportunity to try and get their own house in order, put the governance in place, and many organisations just simply haven't. To that degree, then what does AI governance, what does operationalizing AI ethics look like on the ground? Well, it's to Simone's point, it's that ongoing monitoring piece. So I think we'll see a rising up of tools to help businesses keep a grasp of that. I'm quite excited about the real-time reg tech opportunities that's going to bring, because there's going to have to be some element of real-time supervision here. So that's quite exciting. But all in all, for the AI ethics sector, the rising up of kind of specific codes, standards, certification and audit to really help businesses on the ground to comply, but not just comply in a tick box culture approach of compliance, but actually embed in their own organizations a real culture of what is this AI governance for? It's for protecting, it's harnessing the power of AI, but also protecting people and planet fundamentally. I think, for me, it's going to be about a culture shift. We need to see this culture shift. So on the one hand, it's the kind of regulatory impetus I'm very excited about, but I'm very excited then about this cultural shift that this is going to engender for people. I think AI and AI ethics is becoming certainly more mainstream. Awareness is being raised by profile. We've seen even on Netflix, some of the kind of raising up awareness through coded bias and through social dilemma and the likes. If anyone was in wonder before, we had the Black Mirror series and the like. I just think, some of that sci-fi and I jest, but the reality with coded bias and social dilemma, I think it's bringing to people the real world issues that this is facing. I'd really like to see a Netflix promo or a Netflix mini film on the impact to people and planet. I think we need to see a bit more of that, back to your sustainability point earlier on, and how this could then be maintained. But I know regulatory impetus, AI governance, reg tech for real-time supervisory monitoring isn't sexy, but it's the things, the spokes in the wheel, the cogs in the mechanism that need to happen to make this cultural shift happen.
It's a critical step, and important in the wider context, absolutely. Simone, how about you?
For me, it's the continued movement from the theoretical to the practical. So we can talk, there are many bodies that talk about the theory around AI ethics and adoption, and how you operationalize it. But what excites me is moving from that theory to putting it into practice practically. Most recently, I'm sure you guys are aware of this, Google's model cards for model reporting. I'm quite fascinated by IBM's AI fact sheets and partnerships on AI ML project. I think the more we move away from the theory and just really start having inroads into the how, even if it's an iterative manner, and obviously tools, the tool sets in terms of how they can be used to progress AI ethics adoption. I think that's what's really exciting for me, moving from the what to the how.
And I think across the whole digital responsibility piece, then I think that's the most critical thing often talked about, is we need to move beyond talking about things to doing things, into embedding change and driving transformation for positive impact. So I think excellent point on which to finish. It's been a pleasure talking to you both. Thank you very much for the contributions, and I'm sure that our listeners will have, they will need lots of time to follow up some of the suggestions throughout the conversation, of things that they will have no doubt thought, I've not heard of that bit. I need to go away and investigate a bit more. So many thanks to you both. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Simone.